The Orthodox theologian John Zazoulis opens with these words in his book, Being as Communion. He says the church is not simply an institution. She is a, quote, mode of existence, a way of being. Not simply an institution, but a mode of existence, a way of being. Tonight I want to talk in these next few moments about this way of being. And what the gospel writers suggest is a richer and fuller way of living. And I want to do so by drawing on a common metaphor in the Scriptures, the metaphor of the vine. In the Old Testament, God's people are identified on a number of occasions with this metaphor. We hear in Psalm chapter 80, "You transplanted a vine from Egypt. You drove out the nations and planted it. You cleared the ground for it, and it took root and filled the land." And in this text and others like it, the vine is not just rooted, but even prospers. It fills the land, as it were. And all of this is no accident. Instead, it is the work of a gardener, a vine dresser, that Isaiah will identify in Isaiah chapter 27 with these words, "I, the Lord, watch over it. I water it continually. I guard it day and night, so that no one may harm it." And so under the faithful care of this master gardener, the vine not only filled the land, but Isaiah will go on to write, "This vine will fill all the world with fruit." That is the sound of global blessing. It's carrying with it an echo heard in an earlier promise that's given to Abraham and Sarah and to their descendants in Genesis chapter 12. "I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." And so this people, God's people, Israel is the vine planted and tended by God. But at the same time, the vine symbol in the Old Testament is typically associated with Israel's disobedience. Jeremiah will identify Israel as, quote, "the wild vine that awaits, according to Ezekiel and Isaiah, coming fire and judgment." If the vine is to be the inheritor and dispenser of blessing, the prophetic assessment in the Old Testament is of an unfaithful people who have squandered their inheritance. And so amidst this backdrop, Jesus says these words, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine. You are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends, if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you, so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command: love each other. Jesus' words, John 15, 1 through 17. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So we spend a few minutes here looking closer at this text. I want us to explore the idea of bearing fruit, both what and the how. All the while there's a question that will be circulating in the background. What is it that Jesus wants from us? Bearing fruit carries with it the idea of being productive. After all, we call it produce. Of having something to show for all your efforts. And that something is oftentimes associated with an idea of what is seen outwardly serves as a reflection of what is going on inside or internally. It's for this reason that the biblical writers from Isaiah to Matthew and Luke will make reference to the production of both good fruit and bad fruit. But here in John, that picture is not of good or of bad fruit, but rather the ability to bear fruit or the absolute inability to bear it. So what exactly does Jesus have in mind here when he talks about bearing fruit? Well, one piece here is that this fruit is representative of everything that is the product of effective prayer that is done in Jesus' name. We see that in verse 7, which tells us, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. And again in verse 16, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. But before we conclude here, like many a television preacher, that this is some opportunity to claim status, fame, or riches, it's important that we also note that such a promise is inseparably tied with remaining in Jesus and his words remaining in us. Scholar N.T. Wright concludes here that there's no such thing as a solitary Christian, that we are absolutely connected to Christ. We don't go it alone. And as those who are intimately connected with Jesus, like branches connected to a vine, our ask will of course come to pass because the ask here is quite specifically the will of the Father. It becomes the ask of Jesus, that Jesus prays with and for us, as we'll hear in John 17, even as he is in us. Not simply Jesus as a mediator hanging on a historic cross or someplace distant at the right hand of the Father, but literally working in and through his community today, working in and through us here and now. What's more, this fruit-bearing life exhibits a few things. One exhibit here is that there is the keeping of Jesus' commands, according to verse 10, a point that will be expressed again in 1 John chapter 2, where we read, "We know that we have come to know him if we keep his commands." A second thing that's exhibited is joy. Jesus' motive here is stated in verse 11, that his joy may be in us, and that our joy may be complete. At the outset of 1 John, the writer there bears witness to the word of life, another name for Jesus here. It says that 1 John is written to invite the reader to the same fellowship that biblical writer enjoys, presumably being connected to the vine. It's written so that theirs and the reader's joy may be complete. There's something about joy that is intended to be both delighted in and shared as well. And then the third piece that's exhibited here in the fruit-bearing life is love. According to verse 12, the branches are to love each other, just as Jesus has loved us. And in verse 9, even as the Father has loved Jesus. And as those living on this side of the cross, we can see, in some part, the depth of that love. God's love, which the Apostle Paul reminds us in Romans 5, is demonstrated even when we were sinners. So this is no deserved love, but rather a gracious invitation to embrace from the one who so loved that he gave, as we read in John 3:16. And as those who continue to abide in Jesus, keeping his commands, experiencing his joy and love, we are witnesses, according to verse 16, who are to go, and according to verse 27, we go in the power of the Holy Spirit to testify. And so you hear all this and you think, I'm not capable of that. That's not me. In fact, that's too big for me. I couldn't possibly sustain that kind of life. And you're right. You and I are not capable of this. But that's the difference between being the true vine and being a connected branch. Scholar D.A. Carson observes here, the branches derive their life from the vine. The vine produces its fruit through the branches. Those who are not capable become able. And they become able in two ways according to our text. The first is this: Jesus invites you and I to come and be engrafted in that vine. It says in verse 16, "You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit." The second is this: as those who've been connected to the vine, the Father, in verse 2, prunes. I don't like the sound of that. If you've ever pruned something, a branch, your finger, anything, it's not a pleasant experience. But the text goes on to say the pruning is for a purpose. It's to make us more fruitful. Or as the writer of Hebrews will conclude, God disciplines us for our good in order that we may share in His holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. It is God who grafts us to the vine and prunes us so that we might grow and be fruit-bearing branches. So in all of this, we have been asking the question of what Jesus wants from us. We've had that question circulating in the background. But there's a better question here. It's not what does Jesus want from us. Rather, the more faithful question according to this text is what does Jesus want for us? And here's what we see. Jesus wants you and I to experience that mutual indwelling of total and complete community of persons, what the Orthodox theologians call perichoresis, or that dance that is enjoyed by the persons of the Trinity, an abundance of love that both fills and overflows, to be known, to be loved deeply, to belong and be free of fear, a people whose way of being entails what F.F. Bruce describes as the mutual indwelling of the Father and the Son, and of Jesus and His disciples, and of the disciples with their Heavenly Father as His children. It's a mutuality of love, a love in which obedience is a spontaneous joy and not a painful duty. And so hear now, tonight, and hear this anew. This is what Jesus wants for us. Jesus wants us to be a connected people, grafted to the true vine. Jesus wants us to be a fruit-bearing people, living according to God's will, obedient and experiencing joy. Jesus wants us to be a loving people, loving one another as Christ has loved us. And Jesus reminds His disciples in all times that He is the true vine, that we are the branches. But becoming a branch requires an altogether different kind of wood. On this evening, we know that as we look to the day ahead, we know that it's going to involve a cross. The great I Am, the true vine, is going to go to that cross and would die so that you and I might enjoy a way of being previously unimagined, what we could not see for ourselves. Christ will die that we might have life and have it to the full. May it be so. Amen.